So kind of moving on now to our second block of content, we will go through the plant systems, the animal systems, and homeostasis like we discussed at the start. And then again, we'll have the same sort of thing, so with our Slido polls and our questions at the end. So as mentioned, I'll try to get through this one fairly quickly. Not too quickly, but enough so that we do have time at the end. So basically with our plant systems and our animal systems, again, think big picture. I'm kind of talking to you guys about, this idea of vascular bundles, and we're going from specialized cell to tissue to organ to organism. So that is a big picture. But think of the even bigger picture. On the study design, we're talking about plant systems and we're talking about animal systems. So they're just this idea of when you have, almost like stem cells, like that kind of hierarchy or those levels to organization that work to power this bigger thing. Basically, that's what we're looking at. And we're looking at an example of our plant system here, and we look at multiple examples of animal systems. And it's just this idea of how we are able to have a plant that functions, how we're able to have the human body that functions with stuff like the digestive system or the endocrine system, for example, and how these levels of organization, rather than like one big clump of a system, how that kind of helps the organism function pretty efficiently. So we have this idea, these general levels of organism, and this applies to all of them within plants and animals. So we have our specialized cells. That's kind of our most basic little unit. We have then a bunch of these cells together that form a tissue. A bunch of these tissues together forms our organ. A bunch of these organs together forms our system. A bunch of these systems together forms our organism. So hopefully that's kind of making sense. In this specific example, our specialized cell, we've got our root hair cells. So thinking at the root of the plant, they form tissue, they form roots. So that's kind of making sense. And then this is kind of the important part. This is an image that you will probably get used to, a diagram as well, of these little vascular bundles. So a bunch of these vascular bundles together make up the vascular system of the plant. And then obviously that leads to the entire organism. So talking about these a little bit more specifically, they have non-vascular plants as well. So maybe I'll just address these. These are a little bit more simple and they just work through osmosis. So the process we talked about before. Remember, we're thinking about water moving from high to low, and that's just how stuff kind of gets around. Vascular plants are a little bit more complex, and we're thinking about an actual more established system. So we need to move water through the plant. We also need to move minerals. We need to move products from photosynthesis, so particularly like glucose, sugars, where we get our energy. We'll sort of flag this as well. I know you don't look into photosynthesis and cellular respiration in detail that much in Bio 1-2 anymore. However, it's a really important thing. Like when we were looking at mitochondria and chloroplasts, I don't want you to think photosynthesis, plants, cellular respiration, animals, and that's that. Understand, obviously, photosynthesis is only plants, but cellular respiration is both of them. We all, all the organisms need to get energy somehow. So plants also have cellular respiration. They also need glucose. Try not to fall into that trap of thinking only animals have cellular respiration, only plants have photosynthesis. Remember that plants do need ATP as well. So that's why it's important to move these photosynthetic products. And the way we do that, focusing on these vascular bundles, we're looking at this idea of xylem and phloem. And that's kind of what you saw, like they look like these little circle bundles. So we'll kind of talk about that a bit more. So in terms of our transport, as you can see with this like transection, I guess this like little view that we have, if this is like a stem or whatever, I don't know, they go vertically. So we have this kind of transport system. You can think of it moving vertically through the plant because obviously we need to get from the roots to the leaves and back as well. So we have xylem, phloem, lignin as well. It's a bit less important. Lignin is basically just to provide structure to the plant. Xylem is really important in this transport of water and nutrients from the bottom up. So we're thinking from our roots, drawing that up to the leaves. Our phloem is really important, particularly from getting our sugars, so that are produced in photosynthesis, so our glucose, stuff like that, from the leaves where the photosynthesis happens to the roots, as the roots really need that energy to grow. Okay, so we can see these in our diagrams here. So you can see the lignin is just kind of what you'd kind of expect a structural kind of molecule to look like. So it just gives it that structure. You've got your xylem here and your phloem, and again, part of those vascular bundles. Here are some differences. So xylem is one-way movement. So thinking of water and minerals drawing upwards. With phloem, we can see kind of the movement of our organic molecules. So when you see organic molecules, just kind of think sugars, basically. And those can move up and down. With our xylem as well, the outer cells are dead, so they're not living. And that can kind of make it a little bit more rigid as well. And that just enables the water to draw through. We can see it's one way, which we discussed. And there's no kind of sieve plate that we can see here. So here, almost like, again, I beware of drawing comparisons because I don't want to get you like too confused. But if you think of like valves in veins, you can almost kind of think about it that way. But this idea that the water just like passes through, there's no separation between these cells. However, with this one, we do have that separation. So those are some kind of major differences to be aware of. Okay, so in terms of the process, so transpiration, here we're thinking of xylem especially, and we're thinking of water. So as you can see here, water is moving upwards. So remember, we're thinking from the roots to the leaves. So it's basically being like it's just, think of it like a vacuum. Like I just think of this like something being like drawn up really. So through the root hair cells, so those specialized cells that we discussed, they're going up and up, and so they're moving through the plant. And we're using this process particularly of cohesion. So there's adhesion as well. But cohesion is basically like when you guys will be familiar with this, like when water, like, if you have 2 drops of water and then they come together and they form one big one, it's kind of like that. So it's this idea of they almost pull each other along, these little water droplets, and it moves its way up. And remember, we're thinking of osmosis as well and kind of things like that too, where it's moving from a low concentration to a high concentration, but we're getting this ability to be pulled up via transpiration. So we're thinking of this adhesion is just kind of like sticking to the cell wall and moving up. Cohesion is this idea of one water molecule kind of linking to another. Like think of the words like cohesion, working like cohesively, and moving upward. And you basically just get this drawing up of water. Hopefully that makes sense. And again, think of that with the xylem in particular. So something else important with kind of water is this idea of stomata. So you can see here, this is open, and this is closed. And so the stomata is the actual sort of holes in the plants, and the things that open and close them are guard cells. So we're getting this idea of water going up, 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 up. So once we get to like, the peak, the leaves of the plant, water can exit that way basically. So this is an example, maybe I'll talk through it first. So if you have your guard cells, remember that these are the things that cause the stomata to open and close. If the guard cells are full, as we can see here, so there's a lot of water, they're basically full, they're being pushed almost, and they push open. And that makes sense because you've got a lot of water, enough water to push it out. That means there's a lot of water and therefore you can let some go. On the other hand, if the guard cells are flaccid, so they're a little bit more loose, they're not, as turgid and they're not pushing things out. Therefore, you don't have that much water, so you don't have enough to push them open. But again, that makes sense because you want to keep the stomata closed because you don't have that much water, so you don't want the water to evaporate. See how that kind of makes sense? This is only just like one example of this type of thing in bio. Like you'll see a lot more throughout the year. You'll see heaps of it in year 12. This idea of when the actual thing, I guess that's affected. So if you're thinking about like transpiration or evaporation here, is the actual thing that causes, I'm explaining this really badly, like the actual thing that causes that kind of process to occur or to not. So if you have not enough water, you don't have enough water to fill the guard cells to open them. Therefore, you're not going to let the water out. You see what I mean in that way? Yeah, you'll learn about that a lot more. It's kind of this feedback system where the actual thing, we'll almost talk about it a little bit in homeostasis, where it's like the actual thing itself can be the thing that determines the pathway of that thing. I know that's such a general way to explain it, but you see it a lot more like in genetics and like protein production and stuff like that next year. Okay, so some factors that affect transpiration rate. So we've got humidity, temperature, wind, and the time as well. So again, with these, I know it seems like a lot, but just think of it in the relationship to water and it should make sense. So if it's humid, transpiration will decrease because there's a lot of water vapor in the air. So remember that if it's humid, it's hot, but the air is muggy. There's a lot of water in the air. So therefore, you basically have there's less of a water concentration. So there's not, when we think about movement, like high concentration to low concentration, if there's lots of water in the air, that means the air outside and kind of the leaves inside, it's a pretty similar concentration. So less water is going to want to come out of the plant, if that makes sense. Like you can almost think of it like isotonic. So that's the idea there. If it's humidity, you're thinking more water in the air. There's no reason why water will want to leave the plant. So therefore you've got transpiration decreasing. You have less of it kind of pulling up the plant and coming out. Temperature. So as temperature increases, as it gets hotter, so we're not thinking of humid hot, but we're thinking of just as the temperature increases, you're going to have transpiration increasing, because think of evaporation. Wind. So as wind blows, we're getting transpiration increasing. Again, evaporation. So if you've got more force of the wind, if that kind of makes sense, those water molecules are going to evaporate. If it's hotter, water molecules are going to evaporate. And time of day, again, you can kind of think about it tying into the first two. So at night, it's going to be cooler. So temperature lower means transpiration rate lower. And also it's more humid at night than it is in the day. So we've got transpiration decreasing. And then when the sun comes out and it's a bit warmer, it's a bit less humid, you have that evaporation. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Okay, so now when we're thinking about the phloem kind of tying into this, we're looking at translocation. So this is a little bit more complex. So basically you've got our transpiration. So we're moving upright. And again, we're thinking from a high region of water concentration to a region of low water concentration. So we'll follow the steps here. So we have our photosynthesis. We've got our glucose. Here it's sucrose. Just think of a sugar, right? It doesn't really matter about the names. So we've got our sugar, and this is coming into our cells. I'm not going to talk about the cells too much, but just think from our leaves to our phloem, right? We're moving this sugar along. So now there's a lot of sugar here. What is going to happen, again, think of osmosis. We have a lot of water here and a lot of sugar here. Hopefully this is sounding a little bit familiar. Think of the diagram we saw really early on with the osmosis process. There's more sugar over here. Water is going to flow into the phloem. So we've got water coming along here. This is going to cause this area of the phloem to swell up. We've got a lot of water, right? It's growing. And that osmotic pressure, so the pressure of the water, is going to push everything down. So hopefully that's making sense. We've got a lot of sugar. Water's going to come in because of osmosis. That's going to swell up. It's going to create this huge kind of pressure and push everything down. What's going to go with it? The sugar. So the sugar is coming down, 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 down. And that's where we're getting this translocation of sucrose. And it's going to these areas of the plant, such as the root cell. So where photosynthesis doesn't really happen, we're thinking of like roots. And that's putting the sugar and kind of the molecules that we need in there. So you can see that unloading. And then now there's not that much sugar there. The water will kind of go back. So you can see how it's this nice cycle. Like, I know I'm just giving a general overview, but you can see that the processes really tie into each other, and it just creates this very well-oiled machine. And you'll see that with all the other systems as well. So kind of, again, think about it bigger picture. What's the general objective? And we're just wanting to get water from areas where there's a lot of it to areas where there's less. And same thing with the sugar, areas where we've kind of collected it, where there's a lot of it, to areas where there's less. And we're using kind of both of these systems to allow that to happen.